What's going on, everyone? Happy Friday Eve. We are in for a treat today. We are talking about workforce analytics using emotional intelligence, my favorite topic. And then I got a workforce analytics expert. Nick, what's going on, man? How are you?
Good. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you, man. So before we get into this topic, I actually spoke about this like a week or two ago at the SHRM Talent Conference. It seemed to be a hot topic, so that's why we're here today talking about this. Before we get into it, though, can you tell everyone who you are and why you're passionate about this?
Yeah, sure. Nick Fontaine, learning and development manager in the oil and gas space, as well as I own my own training solutions consulting firm. So I've been in learning and development for 10 years, fell into this space unknowingly, to be quite honest. I've had a passion and love and desire in just making an impact on people's personal and professional development has been an aspiration for me.
Well, you said unknowingly, so now I got to ask, what happened? What was the story behind that?
Yeah, no. So started off as a chemical process operator, PPG Industries, and I was one of those people who always had my hand up, like, what are we doing with training? What are we doing with personal development and growth? And kept my mouth open long enough, I guess, to where it was like, okay, put your money where your mouth is. We're going to give you an opportunity to help build and grow and streamline our training processes.
We
And
lose you, Nick?
ever since, it's been all passion and drive.
Okay, got you. I lost the connection for a little bit, y'all. So I hope y'all can hear me. Hope y'all can hear Nick. Sounds like we're back in full effect. All right, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope everyone heard that. So that's a story for a lot of L&D folks I've met. They're like they just fall into it by doing something similar to you. They realize like they really care about that development side. And what we come to realize is there's two components to it, right? That really get looked at separately, but should be collaborative. So that's data and analytics, and then that human side of the house, which we're going to talk about today. So tell us a little bit more, Nick, about what you're seeing in the industry and in the space about how data and emotional intelligence are being leveraged today, if at all.
Yes, sure. I call it myself the intersection of emotional intelligence and data and analytics. And I think more than ever in today's world, with the continuous advancement and technological expertise that we're seeing, right? Just look at AI, look at NLP processing, natural language processing, in terms of whether or not, to the extent of the utilization of data and analytics or in conjunction with emotional intelligence, I'm not quite sure, but there's a huge opportunity and opportunity to leverage with what we have in terms of being able to, one, not only look at emotional intelligence as a soft skill, which it often is, but the other side of it is being able to tie that and understand how that shapes personal growth, professional development, and also looking at the intertwining and improving our decision making. There's so many tools, systems out there that can help gauge your understanding and your natural behavior based off of intellectual instincts or
Mm-hmm.
learned instincts. So when you look at that avenue, I kind of break it down between what's learned through experiences versus what's learned from actually being taught, and how the intertwining of that shapes your emotional intelligence if you're able to measure that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something key at the end there. If you're able to measure that, and one of the questions I always receive is, how do you measure emotional intelligence? And what I've realized is like a lot of people forget that we have human insight, right? That is data. We don't like to use that data for whatever reason. I guess because it doesn't look pretty on a dashboard all the time. But I love Stefan Gann's quotes. He's the data intelligence officer and analytics officer, chief data intelligence and analytics officer at Pepsi. And he said that if you're not careful, you fall into what is known as the empathy gap. And the empathy gap is when you're focusing too much on the data, because the data tells you the what and the when, whereas the emotional intelligence or the empathetic aspect tells you the why. So how do you take that quote, Nick? Do you agree that we miss out on some things if we're only looking at the data and then we forget about that human side of things?
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. I think that's an important, I would say, takeaway that you shared. And yeah, it's so easy to get ingrained to the data analytics. I sometimes have to kind of take a step back and, to your point, like, understanding that what's been captured, but what about the behavior and what triggered that behavior? And oftentimes it leads me back to the fog model and understanding what led this person to behave and take that action
Mm-hmm.
and what motivates one's behavior in certain instances. Then that measurement piece kind of comes into place. And I think the underlying element of that piece for me and from my experience and what I've from other industries and business sectors is it's self-awareness, which goes to your point, looking at personal insights, right? Like if we're able to have self-awareness of what motivates us to do something versus what doesn't, looking back at that in terms of I had a thought, what triggered me to act on that thought versus what, and then how did I feel in that moment? I think that's the important thing that sometimes we overlook, and I've been guilty of it myself, is
We all have.
we don't look at how we felt in a moment, and that's the true essence of why we did something or why we didn't do something. And furthermore, why did we do it in that particular manner, right or wrong or indifferent? So again, I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I think that's a powerful statement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you talked about like learning the lesson after that decision was made, or after, so you can see what the consequence was and really applying that as you move forward. In the military, we call it that an after action report, right? Looking at, what was the action? What did we expect to happen? Was that the outcome? How can we improve? And then where's there some room? What went well? And then where's some room for improvement? So I love that you said that. So I know a lot of the listeners or watchers, if they're watching this, they're wondering like, all right, workforce analytics and emotional intelligence, what should I be measuring? So what would you say would be important for them to look at when it comes to like identifying the people side of things, that really ties into the business goals, and objectives as well?
Yeah, no, great question. That's a great segue. And when I look at workplace leadership or just professional development, right? One, you can look at sentiment analysis, right? How do they not only feel in the moment, but how do you analyze how you feel in
Mm-hmm.
the moment? And the second part of that, which is huge all across the learning and development space, regardless of how you look at it, is that engagement piece, right? Like from understanding our human essence and dissecting that for once, like Jevon or Nick, like we're an audience of two. There's a facilitator. What is going to help engage Jevon versus what's going to help engage Nick? And I think the
Yep.
biggest thing is not so much from the facilitator perspective. It should be from the audience. Like what resonates with us, what captivates us in that moment, and how do we naturally react to that? And then just being able to display sentiment in that process, and understanding that, hey, clearly Jevon had a reaction when I said this, or Nick reacted this way when I did this, right? And being able to capture
Yeah.
that moment and hone into that. I think from a workplace perspective, in terms of particularly leadership, like that's twofold. One, from a leader being able to read the room in a sense. I think that's the phrase that's often kind of spread around. But then the other part of that is the audience and the members within that setting their own expectations to understand that dynamic in terms of what their role is in the engagement metric piece.
Yeah, and I think you said a lot of great things there. It's like the sentiment of, if I am doing said thing, if I'm leading a training, if I'm leading a team, like what is their reaction, right? Am I giving them space? Am I communicating in a way that resonates with them so that they can grasp the concept of what I'm being said? Am I being clear in that? And then are the expectations set ahead of time so they know, I know what they're looking to get out of that thing, and then they also know what I'm looking to give them out of that said thing. So I think that a lot of times there's a disconnect there, and we don't give that space as leaders or as trainers, facilitators, etc., to say, what is your intent? Right? What is your intent for being here? And what is my intent for you? Right? What am I looking to pour into you with? And I feel like if we did that from the outset, more often than not, people will engage more, right? Because they will feel valued. Two, they would feel like you're kind of tailoring it to them. Because in the workplace are meaningful work and recognition, and you do both if you acknowledge that intention and then communicate that so you can tailor it so they're getting what they need out of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was a powerful statement that you led with there in terms of like that should be a common practice. For instance, I recently went to a local networking event here in Houston, Joey's Cup of Coffee, right? And they always lead with what is your purpose, right? So instead of the facilitator from a training perspective, always looking at like what is the objective, like I would kind of turn it around and use the audience, right? Lead with that in terms of what are you looking to get from this, right? Like, what do you want from this? How do you want to react? How do you want to feel? And I think between the audience sharing that information and then the facilitator or trainer being able to take that in, I think that enables you to effectively measure one, that sentiment analysis, and then those engagement metrics.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you said something key, like you can measure that because if you look at a trend over time, right, there's your data. Like most people say they want X thing or their intent is this thing. If we have 70% of people saying that, maybe we can tailor the training to be a little bit more forward on whatever that objective was. Right. So I think that you're spot on with that, being able to identify sentiment and really vocalize it. Right. That's data. Right. Somebody vocalizing it and then taking whatever they vocalized and saying, hey, here's how we're going to apply it to our goals in the organization. Here's how we're going to revamp our training to make sure we're hitting that objective that kept being mentioned over the span of a year, whatever it is. But I feel like that's the data that's not really being collected or leveraged when we're talking about making sure our employee engagement, our retention, and our even our promotional prospects are being looked at and tracked in a proper way. Right now, I feel like everyone just gets these systems in place, and they're like, we have to use these systems, right? I don't know what your experience with that, Nick, is, but what do you feel could be leveraged a little bit better as far as like the tracking of data from a human standpoint?
Yeah, I think you said it, and that ties into like the topic what we're here discussing today, like that emotional intelligence piece, right? And how you tie that into data and analytics. Like it has to be more than what plot X or plot Y is,
Hmm.
and the behavior piece is what's critical, right? And that's gonna touch the surface of what you're looking at from an emotional and intelligence perspective. So from my experience and from a systems perspective, I think one key thing, and I'm actually working on a project privately in my own personal development and career space, is how do you take systems and technology and set it up in a way to where it fits the needs of the individual, not the organization,
Mm.
right? Because if you tie it in directly to the organization, you're going to forever look at it from that typical metric perspective. Like we know what we want to track and what we want to find, but what about those things that haven't surfaced or you haven't thought about? And you can only get that from an individual behavior type of perspective. So from my end and from what I saw, I think there's a huge opportunity there and a door wide open for a lot of learning and development professionals, talent professionals to dive deep and look at, okay, we have a system, but what was the system developed for? Was it developed for
Hmm.
the organization or was it developed for the individual, meaning the human, right? And then when you look at it from that perspective, you look at social media today, you look at all networking different platforms. I think the formula is there,
Yeah.
but from a system perspective and a metric perspective within organizations, we don't use that things in that facet because we're always looking at metrics that have already been built versus those human metrics. And a lot of it, to be quite honest, we've never thought about what those human metrics are, right? Like we facilitate, we give, and then we grab, but that metric piece of that is so invaluable
Hmm.
that we have to start looking at that and looking at setting up systems in that particular facet.
Yeah, and I'm curious about what that looks like. So if we do it from an individual perspective, like can you elaborate more on like what we would get out of that versus that organization at high level where everything looks the same for everyone, right? So tell us a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yeah, no, great
I
question.
love that.
Yeah, all of my little brain cells are they're trickling right now for sure. Uh, for me, again, it kind of goes back to the formula is there in terms of what it would look like. the best way I can put it from a metaphorical perspective is, don't set the system up to drive the human, let the human drive the system. So having an open-ended system or process that moves and flows based off of how the human moves and flows. And I think, again, to me, I don't have a definitive answer at the moment, but you look at social media, you
Yeah.
even look at LinkedIn, whatever particular media platform it is, right? The humans are driving
Yeah.
how that system works, and it's shifting accordingly, right? So from a
Got it.
learning and a talent perspective, you don't have any metrics until you're able to look at those behaviors and those trends from how that particular individual or group of individuals are interacting with the process and what they're gaining from whatever that system or that process is.
Yeah, and I feel like this is great because that's really where the whole concept of assessments came from, right? So if we identify behavioral patterns, everything is patternistic, right? And when we can detect and define the pattern, then we're able to say, okay, here's the resources that may better serve you. Here's your strengths. Here's your room for improvement. All these things, right? That's the whole premise of an assessment from the perspective, right? But I love that you're saying, like, apply that premise of, hey, let's personalize it as they go on. This is where data is going to really come into play. Oh, over time we recognize that you're less effective if you have 16 tabs open. Right? How
Right.
about we take your system and we make sure we group these certain tabs, because you seem to go in here 98% of the time. Right, here's where all your work is. So let's separate that and say these are the red tabs, these are important. So that's something like that, right? Where we're helping to augment the people, right, from an individual standpoint, so we can strengthen them and make sure they're better served. Is that what you're? That's pretty much the depiction, because that's
Yeah,
how it sounds to me.
yeah, absolutely. Another example would be using the like and dislike, right? Like
Yeah.
being able to gauge and say, okay, this particular individual liked this content,
Mm-hmm.
or they didn't like this content. Well, why didn't they like it or they gravitate to it? Maybe seeing the content in a different way, or the articulation of the information is disseminated in a different way. Like
Yeah.
giving them the option to tell you what it is that they're gravitating to and what they're able to do with that information versus what they're not. Then you can take from there and have a better understanding from an individual and a human behavior perspective. Okay, it's not so much that they're not getting the information. It's not that I need to alter the way I facilitate. It's the way they need to see the information and what they want to be able to do with it. And the only
Yeah.
way you can honestly get that from is not going to be from a custom made formula or algorithm. You're going to have to get that from the individual in real time and be able to take that, just like you expect them to take that information, dissect it, and apply it. We, from a learning and development, talent, and human performance perspective, need to be able to do the same for the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And this is something I recommend often. Like if I go into an org, like create a menu, right? So like think about total compensation, right? This is where that data analytics and that human side really comes into play. That total compensation piece. A lot of companies have been just throwing a bunch of benefits in a package. You can't edit it. You can't really change it. Only thing you can select is your healthcare stuff, right? But what if we say, okay, your total compensation is $200,000. Right? Here's a menu of benefits. These are non-negotiable. Like we have to give you these, but here's some things that you can select that still may equate. Right, and it automatically lets them choose what they value, so they can say, okay, maybe I want an extra day of PTO versus receiving this gym membership because I don't really care about the gym. Right, so that's one example of what you're talking about, where you apply it and personalize it real time, and they're giving you the data. They're saying this is what I value and this is what matters to me. Because I'm already seeing companies kind of do it. They have these bots that walk you through how to select your benefits and all that
Hmm.
stuff, but they're not taking it to that next level where I can actually personalize, right? So I love what you're saying, Nick, is like tying it to the individual and saying, hey, we know you're unique in your own way. We're going to allow you to leverage that uniqueness, and we're going to value that uniqueness. And here's how we're going to apply that. And from a workforce standpoint, where we're talking about making sure that people perform at a higher level, right? That is super invaluable for people as they move forward. Like, what do they want to do, right? What do they want? What do they want their career trajectory to look like? We don't ask that often enough. And once we ask that, then we can kind of customize the training, right? We can customize, who they meant to get mentored by, or what conferences they attend, and we can kind of map that out. And I feel like we're just missing on all these points because we're so tied to pulling this data that's actually useless for the most part, right? Instead of focusing on what really matters.
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely.
Sorry, I went on a soapbox, man. My bad.
No, no, I love it, man. I'm over here taking it all in. So this is a learning opportunity for me. But I think we're very aligned on the opportunity that's there, and then like just big takeaway from what you just mentioned. That's emotional intelligence, right? Like giving the human being an opportunity to choose. I think that ties in perfectly because then they can therefore make the best decision from them with how they feel and based off of their dynamic versus this is all I have to give or
Hmm.
all I have to choose from, right? That there's nothing outside of that. And I think to your point again, right? Like I think from an organization and workplace perspective, we're going in that direction, which is a positive thing, right? And I look forward to seeing just the overall incremental development and advancement of that, right?
Yeah.
I think it's going to make things so much more better for the employee, which I think in some particular aspect, a lot of people, whether myself or even maybe members of the audience, we can all relate and resonate with that.
Absolutely, man. So we're winding down here. What are some of the things like you're seeing, like from a forward thinking standpoint? What are you seeing, or what do you think is going to happen when it comes to that inter? What I forgot what you called it, the interconnection between the
Yeah, the
two
intersection.
intersection. Yeah, the intersection between the workforce analytics and the emotional intelligence piece.
Yeah, great question. That intersection, I see both of those hitting each other dead on. Not a real world collision, of course, but a healthy collision. Kind of take it back. Not that I'm a science person or guru by any means, but if you believe in the Big Bang Theory, you kind of take that ideology and they collide dead on and create something that's extravagant, that's unimaginable. And the reason I kind of put it in that perspective and exemplified in that particular fashion, you can't have one without the other. And
Mhm.
understanding how they come together, I think is just going to be huge and very positive from an organizational perspective, but even furthermore from a personal perspective. I think you look at what we have in terms of like technology, like there's the watches that track like heart rhythm, oxygen levels. Like to me, that ties into emotional intelligence. We may have not looked at it from that perspective, but why is my heart rate at this level right now? Like, what am I feeling in that moment? And I think from a learning perspective, there's a huge opportunity to take the moment and dig deeper and build those learning analytics into some of that technology to say, okay, my heart rate is higher than normal, right? You may stop and ask why, but do you understand why based off of how you were feeling in that moment, which then led you to present a particular behavior. So I think the opportunity is huge, and we're certainly heading in a direction. And I just can't wait to see that collision take place and what comes from that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. And that really, yeah, that really resonates because I'm seeing, organizations are starting to understand from a wellness standpoint how it impacts performance, right? So that the fact that you use that example was really spot on, because they're starting to use that technology to, make sure that the people are moving or taking part in having healthy decision, healthy lifestyles. So, man, I appreciate this conversation, Nick. Appreciate your perspective and standpoint on everything. Tell everyone how they can connect with you, brother.
Yeah, sure. I'm on LinkedIn. Nick Fontaine. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. If you look at my LinkedIn page, you also have an avenue to connect with me via my website, learn more about my consulting business there. So yeah, unfortunately, right now LinkedIn is the only kind of playground I have in terms of networking. So yeah, just find me on LinkedIn, and we can certainly connect, and you can learn more about me there.
Hey, I love LinkedIn, so hey, nothing wrong with that, man. We have one question before we conclude. It says, "How can emotional intelligence enhance workforce analytics for better decision making?"
Yeah, great question. I think we touched a little bit
Yeah.
about that. So one, like the emotional intelligence piece in enhancing workforce analysis ties for at least for me is the behavior, right? And I always mention of the fog theory and model. I don't know if anyone on the audience is
You got to
aware or
explain that
familiar.
one, bro. You got to explain that one.
Yeah, so the fog theory is kind of relatively new in a sense, but it looks at actions and prompt. So what prompted the individual to do something? And then how do you create the prompt, not so much to get the individual to do what you want them to do, but
Mm-hmm.
what they need to do for what's necessary for them, right? So I kind of say that, and I'll sum it up. Like if we're able to set the stage for human alignment from a workforce perspective to say, this is the desired outcome,
Mm-hmm.
what prompt then do we create to get that from the employees or those set individuals, right? Like saying, okay, if it's going to require X for the employee to do whatever it is, just this is probably going to be a lame example in a sense, but if we need them to stretch a certain way ergonomically or shift their posture, like we have to be able to, again, tying back to what we just mentioned, give them options like, okay, we have X amount of prompts. What prompt is going to help Jevon sit up straight
Mm.
or stretch a certain way, right? Or anyone in the audience. So that would be my answer. That may be kind of a long-winded and maybe not direct answer, but I think it's different ways to look at it. And I think one, going back to human behavior and setting them up with the correct prompt will then lead to better decision making for the individual, which will create those desired outcomes.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like, because there's been a lot of science around the concept of nudging, right? So nudging is being able to from an ethical standpoint, being able to get people and influence them in a direction without making the decision for them. So that's that. Yeah, that actually is a lot of data around that, how that works, and I feel like you're spot on with that. Making sure that we're giving them prompts and reminders, but seeing which ones work best for them. So doing like A/B testing with them to test things out to see what works best with them. So yeah, no, 100%, man. I love that. And before we conclude, I just want to give the audience like a 3-step workforce planning model leveraging emotional intelligence. So the first one is when we diagnose issues, instead of just tracking data, for data's sake, we can identify behavioral cues on the individual level, like you were talking about, Nick, and then also training leaders to get data, right? Asking those right questions so we can make sure we're optimizing and are the way we care for our employees so they can be the best version of themselves. And the second component is retaining that talent, right? Coaching managers at that frontline manager level, right? To respond with empathy, because these are skills that we're talking about here, right, Nick? These are skills that we're referring to. And then that second piece is also under retaining talent, creating that psychological safety so people can give us feedback on what we're doing. And then the third piece is aligning it with the culture. So that's why I love when you said taking it to the individual level, because the individuals, us coming together as individuals is what creates that culture, right? That organizational culture. So that was fire. So that third piece, aligning with culture, is developing people not just to fill roles, but to also make sure that they're developing them from a well-being standpoint so that they can address the business needs at their highest level. So thank you again, Nick, for being here. Thank you to everyone who has dropped a ton of questions. I'm going to go on YouTube. YouTube is always representing LinkedIn, Facebook. I need y'all to come on now. I see my man Adam on Facebook. Thank you, bro. But link Facebook, YouTube. Yeah, thank you. All right, we got some questions in here, Nick. I'm gonna go in here, respond to y'all questions in the comments, so I don't leave y'all hanging. But we're out of time for today. If you are not connected with me on LinkedIn, connect with me, Jevon Wooden. You'll see a light bulb, and also not even also go to YouTube, search Jevon Wooden one, and you'll see me. I'm here every day, all day. So I appreciate you all. Tell me what content you want to see. Nick, thanks again, brother, and we will see you soon. Remember to keep ascending.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Have a good one.